Most of us have had traumatizing experiences as children. We grow up, we become ordinary citizens. And yet there are some children who have traumatizing events. Divorce in their family, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, physical abuse, dysfunctional families, alcoholism in the family. And they grow up and they become serial killers. And there's a quantum leap between somebody who is raised in a dysfunctional family and then growing up and becoming a serial killer.
In some cases, trauma leads to a process of so-called dissociation. The child defends himself by suppressing all emotional feelings towards family and friends.
Maybe I started shutting down to save myself the pain of what was going on. It was effective. It worked. Ever since then, I've never been a real emotional person.
What else could have aggravated Jeffrey Dahmer's feelings of isolation?
The boys that he tried to associate somewhat did not accept him fully. And I would also say that from time to time they would tease him and somewhat make fun and ridicule him.
He always seemed pretty nice to me, like he didn't make fun of nobody, and he wasn't, you know, like a lot of high school kids are cruel, just go out of his way to pick on people, or I don't think he was too popular, so I don't think nobody really liked him. He's kind of what they call nowadays a nerd.
When the child has become dissociated from the world which he feels has rejected him, it reinforces his trauma, and he begins to develop fantasies of an imaginary world in which he's powerful and in control. These comforting fantasies become the most significant factor in the child's subsequent development.
It's hard to be a child, and people pick on children, and other kids are merciless. And so children develop various defensive strategies. One is to fantasize the power to retaliate against one's enemies. Hopefully, as the child matures, he acquires better coping mechanisms that don't rely on impossible fantasies to achieve an adaptation. In Dahmer's case, he did develop better coping strategies from time to time, but also some that were far more deleterious, because he did in fact learn how to control other people, not because they'd been mean to him, but to serve a sexual need that he'd acquired. I don't think it's abnormal for a child to have fantasies of being able to zap his enemies. I think it's abnormal to carry those fantasies into adulthood.
For people who cannot deal with their own inner struggles, their own inner monsters, if you will, those own feelings, the feelings of low self-esteem, the feelings of hurt and pain, those feelings will fuel those fantasies, so you're fantasizing more and more. And as you fantasize more, the fantasies become more violent, more specific, more oriented toward those who are less powerful than you. Donald Harvey is a very good example. Here's a man who, when he was at the age of 5, as a child, at the age of 5, was sexually abused by an uncle and by a next-door neighbor. Now, for the next 13 years, he was being sexually abused by these men. They threatened him. They told him that if you ever tell, we will hurt your mother. He loved his mother. He was never going to tell. He lived in terror. When his mother went to town to do shopping, he was alone. He knew at any time these men could come and get him, and they would just show up. Now we're going to abuse you. He was never in control of his life. At the age of 18, he got a job working in a hospital. And what did he do? That first year, he killed 12 people. And he was killing men about the same age as those who had been abusing him. They're actually transferring the fear that they've had in their own lives and have not been able to deal with constructively. They're transferring that fear onto other people. They want them to fear them. They want them to suffer. That's very, very important. It helps fuel their own fantasies.
Classic warning signs of dangerous fantasies turning to reality include fire setting and cruelty to animals. In each case, the child feels a surge of power as he controls forcibly his environment or subject. Jeffrey Dahmer was not outwardly cruel, but he had a fascination for the viscera of dead animals. He enjoyed the feelings of control while experimenting with the bones and intestines of those he found dead at the side of the road. To Jeffrey Dahmer, these dead animals became compliant objects of pleasure.
This beagle that got hit. Wanted to see what the insides looked like, so just cut it open. It was already dead. And wanted to do, I guess, something shocking with it. So I took it and stuck it up on a pole in the neighbor's wooded area.
Jeff said that it wasn't unusual for him to take squirrels and rabbits, dead dogs, and bring them home, use a knife to peel all the skin off of it, all the flesh off of it, use various different chemicals to bleach the bones, and then he'd set them out and dry them out, and then try to reconstruct it. And then actually had a little burial ground next to the side of his garage where it was marked what animal was buried in, each place. I find that bizarre. I mean, if my son was doing something like that, I'm sure I would have knocked him upside his head and told him to knock it off. For whatever reason, maybe the fact that his father was a chemist and was involved in chemicals, and the fact that Jeff took, interest in that was pleasing for his father. Like I'm pleased that my son has taken up criminal justice in college.
As the child goes through puberty and begins to masturbate, his sexuality becomes associated with elements of his fantasy.
He was a homosexual from his very first awakenings sexually. But the interesting part was, and he made this very clear and said it, that his very earliest sexual fantasies always were intertwined with killing, or the cutting up or dismembering of bodies, and that they were together. Sexual and the killing were intertwined, and those are the words he used, that they were mixed together.
In the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, the most puzzling aspect of his sexual responsiveness, assuming that he was honest with me on this point, as I think he was on others, is how it was that there came a time he found himself sexually excited by the appearance of glistening viscera from his victims. I would trace the origins of that very unusual paraphilia to childhood experiences in which, at a time when other boys would masturbate to fantasies of the prettiest cheerleader in the school, Jeffrey Dahmer was having sexual arousal and masturbation while thinking, accidentally or otherwise, about the dissection of a fetal pig at school, about the dissection of dogs he'd found dead at the roadside. And that as he would have such ideas intrude into his sexual fantasies, he inadvertently conditioned himself to become aroused to some of that imagery.
The mingling of sexual desire with fantasies of power and control creates an appetite for increasingly violent sexual fantasies, which the individual feels the urge to act out. Jeffrey Dahmer's fantasy was very extreme, to have complete control over a totally compliant partner, an object of pleasure. This kind of desire can lead to necrophilia.
He reported that he had noticed a man who jogged along a road and he was attracted to him. He did not know how to meet this man except forcibly, so he devised a plan by which he would knock the man unconscious. He reported that he broke a baseball bat in half and waited on the side of the road for the man to come by. On that particular day, the man did not come by. I asked him what he would have done had he captured the man, and he told me that he would have taken him into the woods and laid down with him. It was at this point that Jeffrey's paraphilic fantasies began.
And why do you say that?
Because he told me that his fantasies then involved forcefully having complete control over someone, over another person.